Welcome to the Lodge. From the riverbanks to the end zones, we're diving deep into everything that matters most to the colony. You're listening to State of the Beavers. I'm your host, Brian, and whether you're a diehard alum, a nature enthusiast, or just here for the ecosystem, we've got you covered. Today on the show, we're breaking down the latest headlines, checking the pulse of the community, and asking the big questions that define our state today. Grab your gear, a beer, and settle in. It's time to gnaw through the noise. This is the State of the Beavers, starting right now.
All right, let's talk about one of the most unpredictable, just absolutely bonkers finishes to a college football season we have ever seen. We're diving deep into the chaos of 2025. So, here's the big mystery we're going to solve today. How on earth does a team that doesn't even win its own conference go on to win the national championship? I mean, seriously, how does that happen? Well, to get the answer, we've got to rewind the tape. To really get a grip on this whole chaotic mess, we need to go back to the calm before the storm. Let's jump to week 10. Back when everything felt normal. Okay, so check this out. Heading into that final stretch, this was your top 5. You had South Carolina sitting pretty at number 1, right on their heels an undefeated Texas Tech. Then you've got SMU, Miami, and Georgia. The usual suspects, right? These were the heavyweights. Everyone, and I mean everyone, figured these were the teams we'd see battling it out for the title. It all seemed so set in stone. And it wasn't just the team rankings that felt like a done deal. The Heisman race? Yeah, that looked pretty much wrapped up too. SMU's quarterback, this guy Kevin Jennings, was just running away with it. He was the clear, undisputed favorite. Honestly, it felt like they could have just handed him the trophy right then and there. And this chart really paints the picture, doesn't it? I mean, look at that. Jennings had a nearly 36% chance of winning, according to the odds. That's a huge lead on the entire rest of the field. It was absolutely his award to lose. But then came November. And folks, this is where everything, and I mean everything, started to fall apart. This is where the chaos really begins. And it didn't ease in either. Nope, it kicked the door down right away in week 11. The very first weekend of November sent an earthquake through the college football world. And we're not talking about close games here. These were jaw-dropping, season-altering upsets. Your number 1 team, South Carolina, they go down. And then you have number 6 Texas at home getting absolutely stunned by Vanderbilt, who was a 13.5-point underdog. All of a sudden, the top of the pyramid looked like it was made of sand. And just look at the fallout. The top 5 got a complete facelift. Poof, South Carolina's out. SMU vaults up to number 1. And suddenly, you've got teams like Duke and BYU in the mix. But, spoiler alert, that top spot was more like a hot potato. Yeah, if you thought the chaos was a one-week thing, you were mistaken. This was just the beginning. The theme for the rest of the month was simple. Nobody is safe. I mean, check this out. The very next week, undefeated number 2 Texas Tech gets knocked off. Then, a couple weeks later, the new number 2, SMU, trips up against Louisville. It was like a curse. The top of the rankings just became this revolving door. So, while all this team chaos is happening, the Heisman race was having its own meltdown. That sure thing we talked about? Yeah, not so much. It was a total roller coaster. You see Jennings just dominating, he's the guy. But then SMU stumbles and that door just cracks open. And that's when Fernando Mendoza from Indiana just goes on an absolute tear through November. He comes out of nowhere and surges right past everyone to take the lead at the very end. And remember this quote? This was what everyone was saying back before the chaos. Jennings controls the race if SMU keeps winning. Well, they blinked. That one loss, that's all it took. The entire story just flipped on its head. And this is what makes it so interesting. In the end, Mendoza gets the Heisman, right? But Kevin Jennings, the early favorite, still cleans up with the other big awards, the Maxwell, the Walter Camp. It just goes to show you how incredibly close that vote must have been. A real split decision. Okay, so just when you think, all right, it can't get any crazier than this, championship weekend happens. And it delivers one last gigantic plot twist right before the playoffs. Are you ready for this? The number 1 and number 2 teams in the country both lost. On the same day, number 1 Georgia gets upset by Arkansas. Number 2 Ohio State gets stunned by Penn State. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It was pure, unfiltered chaos. So, after all that, the dust settles and we have our first ever 12-team playoff bracket. And who is the number 1 seed in the entire country? Duke. Would you believe it? And Penn State, after that massive upset, they managed to sneak in at number 4, which, crucially, gets them a first-round bye. So now, let's follow the path of our eventual champion, a team that had to walk through this absolute minefield to pull off one of the most unlikely championship runs you will ever see.
With the bracket set, the stage was perfect for a classic Cinderella story, right? A team that nobody saw coming. And trust me, the upsets were far from over.
The madness just kept on coming. Look at this. First round, you've got number 12 Boise State taking out number 5 Ohio State. A huge shocker. Then, in the next round, the number 1 overall seed Duke gets sent packing by number 9 SMU. The lesson? Even in the playoffs, no one was safe.
And all of this chaos opened the door for Penn State's incredible run. Think about this journey. First, they actually lose their conference championship, but still get that bye. Then, they have to take down Boise State, the tournament's Cinderella. After that, they win an absolute nail-biter of a semifinal against SMU. And just like that, they're in the championship game.
And in the biggest game of the year, they didn't just squeak by, they dominated. Final score, 31-13. Penn State, the team that didn't even win its own conference, completes this unbelievable run and becomes the undisputed national champion. Just wow.
So this whole wild ride leaves us with a huge question, one that's going to define the future of college football. In this new 12-team playoff era, where a team can lose its conference championship and still win the whole thing, does that mean the entire regular season is just an opening act for the chaos to come? Something to think about.
Welcome to the debate. We are looking at a season that really it defied logic, broke records, and ultimately ended in this fascinating collision of philosophies down in New Orleans. We are dissecting Oregon State's 2025 campaign under their first-year head coach, Caleb Ward.
A campaign that, on the surface, looks incredible. I mean, 12 wins, a Pac-12 championship appearance, and a berth in the college football playoff. And yet, when you actually look at the film, I think we're staring at a paradox.
The central question we're wrestling with today is this. Was Oregon State's run to the playoff proof that Caleb Ward's, quote, tactician archetype and his massive Bible offense have fundamentally revolutionized this program? Or, as I suspect you might argue, did the Sugar Bowl loss to Georgia and some earlier stumbles expose a hard ceiling? Did it reveal that, talent and discipline are hurdles that no amount of schematic wizardry can clear?
That is exactly it. Because when you strip away the romance of the underdog story, you have to ask if they truly belonged on that field with the elite. Or did they just ride a wave of high-variance luck, effectively, that just crashed the moment they hit a CEO-tier program like Georgia?
Well, I'm taking the position that this season was a masterclass in efficiency. Ward took a roster with, let's be honest, nothing to protect in terms of legacy, and took them toe-to-toe with the number 2 team in the nation. For me, it's a proof of concept.
And I am taking the position that while the record says 12-1, the game tape tells a story of unsustainable breaks and a team that eventually crumbled under pressure. I mean, you can't scheme your way out of turning the ball over 3 times in a playoff game.
Let's get into it. And to really understand this, we have to look at the mandate Ward inherited. This wasn't a rebuild, it was a resurrection. The program was stuck in stagnation. The directive from the athletic department was explicit. Win with less. They weren't going to out-recruit Ohio State or Georgia in the offseason. They had to beat them on Saturdays through coaching.
Which is a nice tagline, but how does that actually translate to the field?
It translates to the turning point of the season, Week 7. You're 5-1, which is good, but you just lost 37-24 to Duke. Most coaches would panic or turtle up. Ward did the opposite. He made the boldest decision of his career. He benched his starting quarterback, Malik Murphy.
A move that could have lost him the locker room instantly.
Absolutely, but it didn't. He pivots to the unproven Gabari Johnson. And this isn't just a personnel change. It's a philosophical shift. Murphy was a pocket passer trying to run a system that craved mobility. Johnson? Well, Johnson unlocked the Bible.
We keep using that term. For our listeners, let's clarify. When we say the Bible offense, we aren't talking about religion. We're talking about volume, right?
Exactly. It's called the Bible because the playbook is thick enough to be one. It's a multiple scheme, meaning it combines elements of spread, air raid, pro-style concepts, and it's designed to have a specific answer for every single defensive look. But to make that work, you need a quarterback who can extend the play when the answer isn't immediately open. That's what Johnson brought. And the immediate result, a 52-24 demolition of Iowa State, the number 7 team in the nation.
Okay, hold on. This is where I have to pump the brakes on the masterclass narrative. You look at that 52-24 score and you see offensive dominance. I look at the play-by-play and I see a statistical anomaly.
You can't call 52 points an anomaly.
You can when you look at how they scored them. Let's peel back the layers of that Iowa State game. In the first quarter, Oregon State puts up 21 points, but the offense barely touched the field. Zachary Card returns the opening kickoff 98 yards for a touchdown. Incredible play, sure. But then, on the very next kickoff, David Wells Jr. forces a fumble, and Oluwaseyi Omotosho returns that for a score. Then, Jimmy Valzen III forces another fumble on a kickoff, and Amari York runs it in.
But that's complementary football. You can't penalize a team for having a lethal special teams unit.
I'm not penalizing them. I'm analyzing sustainability. You cannot bank on 3 non-offensive touchdowns in the first 10 minutes of a game to build a program. That is high variance. If you take away those miracle plays, is Gabari Johnson really looking like a savior? He managed the game well. I'll grant you his completion percentage was absurd, but he wasn't asked to win it. The game was over before he broke a sweat.
I think you're being a little uncharitable to the data. You mentioned the completion percentage. Let's actually look at it. He went 13 for 14. That is 92%. In college football, that is video game efficiency. It proved that the system works when you have a quarterback who can stretch the defense horizontally.
Horizontally. Unpack that.
Sure. So with Murphy, defenses could pinch in. They knew he wasn't going to run, so they compressed the pocket. With Johnson, because he's a threat to run to the sideline, the linebackers have to widen out. They have to respect the edge. That opens up the middle of the field for those high percentage throws. That 92% completion rate happens because the defense is terrified of Johnson breaking the pocket.
I understand the concept, and it works against Iowa State when you're up 21-0. But does it work when the pressure is real? Because when Johnson was asked to win a game on his own, against Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, the horizontal stretch didn't look so pretty. He threw 2 interceptions and lost a fumble.
You're jumping ahead to the end of the movie. You're skipping the development arc. Between Iowa State and the playoff, look at what happened against Washington State. Week 10, 45-0. That wasn't special teams luck. Johnson accounted for 5 total touchdowns, 3 passing, 2 rushing. He threw for 257 yards. He hit Trent Walker for a 56-yard touchdown. He was dealing. That game proved that Ward could call a completely different game script with Johnson than he ever could with Murphy.
Against Washington State? Sure. Everyone looks like an All-American against a 4-win team. But let's look at the Arizona game. They won 29-24, but how? A miraculous 84-yard touchdown pass to Trent Walker. That's not a system executing a 12-play drive. That's a broken play and a lucky break. My issue with the tactician label is that it implies control, but this team relied on explosive, chaotic plays because they couldn't sustain drives against physical defenses.
I disagree that it implies control in the traditional sense. The tactician archetype isn't about boring, methodical control. It's about finding leverage. And sometimes leverage is chaos. Which leads us perfectly into the second topic. The tactician versus the CEO. The Sugar Bowl against Georgia.
The reality check.
You see a loss? I see a tactical victory that fell short on the scoreboard. Let's look at the box score. Total yardage. Oregon State, 400. Georgia, 400. Exactly even. We are talking about a roster full of 3-star recruits going against a Georgia death machine that stacks 5 stars like firewood. Ward's game plan neutralized that talent gap for the vast majority of the game. At halftime, it was 14-14.
But the game is 60 minutes long. And this is where the CEO archetype of Kirby Smart comes in. We should define this. A CEO coach manages the game from a risk perspective. They build a culture that punishes mistakes. They don't need to be flashy because they know if they play disciplined football, their talent will eventually win. Oregon State played right into that trap.
By being aggressive?
We call that a vanity metric. Yards don't put points on the board if you can't cross the goal line. Let's talk about the red zone, the area inside the 20-yard line. Oregon State made 4 trips into the red zone against the best defense in the country. How many touchdowns did they score?
They scored 1.
1. That is a 25% conversion rate. Georgia went 2 for 3, which is 66%. That is the difference between a champion and a nice story. You can move the ball between the 20s all day, but when the field shrinks, windows get tighter and the tactician needs his players to execute. They didn't.
That's a fair critique of the execution, but consider how they got those yards. The Bible offense was moving the ball against the number 2 defense in the country. Gabari Johnson, despite the mistakes, threw for 187 yards and ran for a touchdown. Saladin Allah rushed for 101 yards, averaging 6.3 yards per carry against Georgia. That proves the scheme works. The tactician put his players in a position to win. The players just didn't finish the meal.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered that the tactician failed in situational football? It wasn't just the red zone. It was 4th down. Oregon State went 0 for 1 on a crucial 4th down attempt. And the turnovers, we have to go back to them. You can't say the scheme works if the scheme doesn't account for ball security. Johnson threw 2 picks. He fumbled. Ward can script all the pressure responses he wants. He can have the perfect play call for a cover 2 shell. But Kirby Smart wins because he instills a culture where you do not beat yourself. Oregon State beat themselves, 3 turnovers to 1.
I see the turnovers as a byproduct of necessary aggression. You don't beat Georgia by playing conservative. You have to take shots. And speaking of shots, let's talk about Zachary Card again. 91-yard punt return for a touchdown in the first quarter against Georgia. That's playmaking. That's the disruption the scouting report talked about. Ward knew he had to create chaos to win.
Chaos is a double-edged sword, though. Yes, Card had that return, which was electric. But relying on a punt return TD to stay competitive is exactly what I mean by unsustainable. If that punt return doesn't happen, this game isn't close at halftime. It's 14-7 Georgia, and the momentum is totally different. The tactician needs chaos because he can't win on structure alone against superior athletes.
Which leads us perfectly into our third topic, the talent gap. The source material was explicit here. The post-game analysis stated clearly that Georgia won due to pure raw talent and just being born more talented.
I hate that excuse. Raw talent is often a convenient hiding spot for a team that wasn't prepared for the moment.
How can you say they weren't prepared? Look at the defense. Skylar Thomas had 8 tackles. He was flying around the field like a heat-seeking missile. They held Georgia scoreless in the first quarter. They held them to a field goal in the third. The defense, led by Thomas and Anthony Hankerson's toughness on the other side, performed admirably. But here is the physics of football. Georgia has depth. They can rotate in 4 defensive linemen who are all going to the NFL draft. Oregon State doesn't have that luxury. When you're fighting a war of attrition, eventually the bigger army wins.
If it was just about the talent gap, then explain the Oregon game in Week 4. Oregon State lost 42-10. Was the talent gap that much wider against Oregon than Georgia? No. The team looked lost. They were unprepared. And in the Georgia game, you mentioned Skylar Thomas, but where was the offensive line when they needed a push in the red zone? You can't claim talent gap only when you lose. Oregon State beat Iowa State. They beat Arizona. They beat Kentucky. Did they have more talent then, or did they just execute better?
The executed Ward system better, but there is a ceiling to what a system can do against 5-star athletes. Look at the play where Oscar Delp scored that 43-yard touchdown for Georgia in the fourth quarter. That wasn't a schematic breakdown. That wasn't someone missing an assignment. That was a tight end who was faster, stronger, and bigger than the linebacker trying to cover him. That is pure raw talent. Ward's job was to keep them in the game until the fourth quarter, and he did that. The fact that a first-year coach with a B+ prestige rating had Kirby Smart sweating in the final 15 minutes proves the concept is sound.
I'm not convinced. You keep going back to keeping it close. But let's look at the Duke game again, Week 7. Duke is not a juggernaut. Duke won 37-24 because they out-executed Oregon State. They forced turnovers. That loss had nothing to do with the talent gap. That was a failure of preparation. And those ghosts came back to haunt them against Georgia. You can blame the 4 stars and 5 stars all you want, but Gabari Johnson throwing the ball to the wrong colored jersey isn't about talent. It's about decision-making. And until Ward fixes that discipline, they will always hit this ceiling.
But that's the beauty of it. This was year one. You're judging the tactician on his debut album. He found his quarterback in Johnson midseason. He installed a complex Bible offense that requires high-level processing, essentially asking college kids to process information like pros. And despite the turnovers, despite the learning curve, they won 12 games. They beat Washington State twice, once in the regular season, 45-0, and again in the Pac-12 championship, 52-21. That shows growth. That shows a team that learns. The Georgia loss was a tuition payment for future success.
Tried a turnover ways like those fumble recoveries against Iowa State, and then regressed to the mean. Relying on 84-yard bombs and punt returns is fun, but it's not a foundation. A foundation is converting third and short. A foundation is scoring touchdowns in the red zone. Oregon State was 1 for 4 in the red zone against Georgia. That is the stat that should keep Caleb Ward up at night.
That 1 for 4 stat is a scar, I agree, but scars are how you learn. Let's look at the bigger picture here. This program was, to quote the Architect summary, stuck in stagnation. Ward came in with a mandate to win with less. Did he fulfill that? Unquestionably. He took a team that was being outcoached and turned them into a playoff team. The 12-win season isn't a fluke, it's a proof of concept. The Bible offense works, the horizontal stretch works, the aggressive defensive play calling works. Now he just needs to recruit the bodies to execute it for 60 minutes against the Georgias of the world.
That's the hope, isn't it? What hope isn't a strategy. My concern is that the tactician approach tries to be too clever. You saw it in the play calling against Georgia, trying to force plays that weren't there. Sometimes you don't need a Bible of plays. You just need to run the damn ball and hold on to it. Kirby Smart played CEO football. Boring, physical, disciplined. And he's the one moving on. Ward brought disruption, but disruption without control is just chaos. And chaos eventually consumes you.
I see why you think that, but I think you're undervaluing the disruption. That chaos is the only way a team like Oregon State can compete right now. If they tried to play CEO football against Georgia, line up and smash mouths, they lose 45-0. They had to be different. They had to take risks. Yes, the risks bit them in the end with the turnovers, but those same risks are what got them the 12 wins in the first place. You can't have the 91-yard punt return without the aggressive mindset that leads to the interception. It's a package deal.
That's a fair point. But moving forward, that package needs to be refined. You can't live on the edge forever.
So, bringing this to a close, let's look at the season in its totality. Caleb Ward's first season was, in my view, a massive success. He took a stagnating program, installed a completely new offensive identity, found a dynamic quarterback in Gabari Johnson, who, let's remember, had a 92% completion game, and took the number 2 team in the nation to the wire in the Sugar Bowl. The foundation is set for a dynasty built on precision.
And I will conclude by saying that while the 12-win season is impressive on paper, the tactician approach has a hard ceiling defined by those turnovers and that red zone inefficiency. To move from a feel-good story to a legitimate champion, Ward has to solve the discipline issues. You cannot give the ball away 3 times in a playoff game and expect to win. The Georgia game proved that while they have arrived on the national stage, they aren't ready to lead it yet.
It really was a clash of philosophies in New Orleans. Control versus disruption. The established giant versus the upstart innovator.
And this time, the CEO won. Kirby Smart's discipline won out over Caleb Ward's schemes. But I will admit, Ward has made Oregon State a team you have to watch.
Absolutely. Whether it was talent or execution that decided the Sugar Bowl, the gap is closing. We encourage you to go back and watch the game film yourself. Look at those red zone trips. Look at the defensive stands. Decide for yourself if the tactician is the future of college football or if the CEO is still the king of the hill.
It's a debate that isn't going away anytime soon.
Thank you for listening to the debate. We'll see you next time.
And that's a wrap on this edition of State of the Beavers. Thanks for spending some time in the lodge with us today. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe on your favorite platform and leave us a review. It really helps the colony grow. Big thanks to our production team and, most importantly, to you for listening. Keep building, keep grinding, and we'll catch you on the next one. Until next time, this has been the State of the Beavers. Stay sharp out there.